By its very nature, so much of the horror genre involves huge amounts of people biting the bullet. And where the slasher subgenre is concerned, that's even more true. After all, the slasher subgenre, which is largely viewed as being ushered in by both Bob Clark's Black Christmas and John Carpenter's Halloween, was the one that became infamous for the amount of bodies these films would pile up. While less is so often more, these films aim to get as high a body count as possible. With the more inventive and gory the kills, the better. When it comes to surviving a slasher picture, sometimes it's down to luck, sometimes it's down to others helping you out, and sometimes it's down to the simple yet oft-avoided notion of using your brain to make smart choices. Opting to make a smart choice in the realm of the slasher movie has so often made the difference between whether a character lives or dies. And here are 10 such examples of some truly inspired wise choices made within the confines of the slasher genre. I'm Jess McDonald for What Culture, spoilers lie ahead. Number 10. Giving the correct answer in Silent Night, Deadly Night. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do in a horror movie is to simply tell some murderous killer whatever they want to hear. In 1984's Silent Night, Deadly Night, Billy Chapman's strict orphanage upbringing eventually results in him leading with a firm hand when it comes to punishment in later life. All of this capitulates on one Christmas Eve, when Billy, decked out as Santa Claus for his boss, snaps and goes on a murder spree. Like so many films of the time, a hefty body count is amassed in a timely fashion. Yet there's one brief moment of hesitation during Billy's bloodthirsty rampage. That hesitation comes when, after having killed the babysitter and her boyfriend, Santa Billy encounters a young girl. Taking a moment, Billy asks the girl whether she's been naughty or nice. After Cindy proclaims she's been nice, she's gifted with a bloody knife as Santa Claus goes on his way. Should she had openly admitted to being naughty, Santa would have clearly handed out the strictest punishment possible to Cindy. Showing that he'd think nothing of killing a child, it's only minutes later that we see Billy decapitate a young bully, because bullying is clearly naughty and totally not nice. Number 9. Playing possum in Jason Goes to Hell. The opening scene to Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, starts in gloriously generic fashion. We first see a typical disposable and needlessly naked, of course, young adult in a classic cabin in the woods setting. Wouldn't you know it, but this vulnerable woman soon finds herself being stalked by Jason Voorhees. Quicker than you can say grab a towel and run for your life, this poor victim is stranded in the middle of the woods and has the hulking frame of Jason towering over her. The thing is, this was all actually part of the cunning ruse to lure Jason to his ultimate demise. While Jason Goes to Hell is a painful film to watch at times, credit has to at least be given for the picture's refreshingly different opening act. You see, that disposable young adult is really an undercover FBI agent designed to draw Jason out into an open part of the woods where a tooled-up SWAT team are waiting to blow Voorhees to smithereens. Despite the plan to literally blow Jason up working so well, what the SWAT team and disgruntled audiences didn't fathom is that this would lead to a movie where the turd-looking spirit of Jason was orally passed from person to person throughout the rest of the film, resulting in a Friday the 13th movie that had only a matter of minutes with the physical presence of Jason Voorhees on screen. Number 8. Nancy turning her back on Freddy, A Nightmare on Elm Street. You could argue that the smartest decision surrounding A Nightmare on Elm Street was actually New Line Cinema's decision to produce the picture in the first place. At that point in time, New Line was largely a distribution house rather than a studio that developed films. Taking a chance on producing Wes Craven's 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street, that decision proved to be so smart that the studio was given the nickname of the house that Freddy built, with that debut Elm Street offering proving to be a huge hit. To look more closely at the narrative of A Nightmare on Elm Street, though, the prime smarts on show are those of Nancy Thompson. Firstly, Nancy has the wherewithal to bring Freddy Krueger's trademark fedora hat out of her dream and into the real world. Secondly, Nancy wisely booby-traps her home ahead of a plan to bring Freddy out of her dream and into the real world. The smartest decision of all, well, that would be Nancy in the film's final battle, opting to simply turn her back on Robert Englund's Krueger. Having realized that Freddy thrives on fear, Nancy ignoring him renders him powerless, and thus the creepy bastard vanishes into thin air. Number 7. Head for the slaughterhouse in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Most people balk at the idea of putting a new spin on an old classic, and the rehashing of old ideas being one of Hollywood's greatest cruxes in recent times. Originality and new ideas are out the window, they say, and what was once old is now new again. Despite a large portion of remakes being admittedly either A, pointless, or B, goddamn awful, one of the better remakes out there is Marcus Nispel's 2003 The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. On the smarts front, it's Jessica Biel's Erin that gets kudos here. After being put through the usual torture and torment associated with the Sawyer family, Erin is running for her life as the bounding figure of Leatherface closes in on her. In a move that proved to be the game-changing moment in Erin's battle for her life, she decides to take up residence in a locker in the Sawyer clan slaughterhouse. Presumably, this resting place was simply chosen because it was the nearest place available when a chainsaw-wielding maniac is on your tail. But the happenstance of this safeguard locale was that Leatherface was unable to find Erin, especially thanks to a timely pig that happened to get in Leatherface's viewpoint. Thanks to that pig distracting old Leatherface, it gave Erin the chance to launch a surprise meat cleaver attack on her hulking opponent and lop off one of his arms before making her big fist-pumping escape to freedom. Number 6. Forever Prepared, Curse of Chucky. In a real-world sense, it had been 22 years since audiences had seen Andy Barclay in the Child's Play franchise, and 23 years since Alex Vincent was in the Andy role. So it was a welcome surprise to see Andy turn up in the closing scene of 2013's Curse of Chucky. Initially pegged as a reboot, Curse of Chucky actually ended up being both a reboot and a sequel, with the Don Mancini helmed picture showcasing that there was still plenty of life in the famed good guy doll. While it's Nika who spends the majority of Curse being tormented by Chucky, the particularly smart decision of the movie comes in the film's final few moments. It's here that franchise fans got the fist-pumping moment of seeing Alex Vincent's Andy featured, as Andy has a parcel delivered at his door. After bringing said parcel into his abode, Alex ends up on the phone to his mother, seemingly unaware that Chucky has risen from his parcel in the backdrop of Andy's phone call. The big twist here, though, is that Andy Barclay has been smart enough to be prepared for Chucky to reappear in his life for the past 20+ years. Thus, Chucky's met with a shotgun-toting Andy who shoots him right between his eyes. Number 5. Staying Silent, You're Next. You're Next is one of the great modern-day slasher movies, with Shani Vincent's turn as badass survivalist Erin a standout of the horror genre. Having grown up in a compound setting where she had to learn essential survival skills, Erin was quick to rely on these instincts when she finds herself in the middle of a home invasion featuring a group of killers in animal masks. Thanks to these skills and her own instincts, Erin was able to overcome the odds and make it out of Adam Wingard's 2011 picture in one piece. When it comes to one particularly smart decision from Erin, that would be how she opted to stay quiet when answering the phone. With the cat out of the bag that the killers had been hired by Felix and his partner Z as part of a plan to have an inheritance head their way, Erin ends up killing Felix via a blender and then stabs Z to death. It's then that Felix's cell phone rings and Erin opts to pick up the call. Giving him enough rope to hang himself with, Erin's silence sees her partner Crispian on the other end of the call, as he reveals that he was also in on this murder spree, which puts all of the puzzle pieces together for Erin. Number 4. Learning from Your Mistakes, Scream 2. Like so many slashers of decades past, the first Scream movie finds Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott positioned as the atypical final girl, who's thrust into a nightmare scenario that sees her stalked and tormented by a mysterious masked figure. Of course, part of the charm of Scream is how it flips the traditions of the slasher subgenre on its head, with Sidney's smarts coming to the fore in her final battle against Ghostface. In a movie that pokes fun at so many familiar horror tropes, the film's closing minutes deliver the age-old trick of the killer, Billy Loomis, not being dead. Startling our survivors, Billy rears up for one final scare, which is soon cut down by Sid shooting him in his forehead. Learning from this, Sidney takes no chances at the end of Scream 2. With Mrs. Loomis believed to be dead, Sidney unleashes an extra bullet into her head just to be safe. Whether Mrs. Loomis would have perked back up for another crazed attack, we'll never know. But in firing that extra shot into the fallen Loomis, Sidney smartly makes sure that Billy's mother is well and truly dead as a dodo. Number 3. Learning from Your Mistakes. Number 2. Happy Death Day. From director Christopher Landon, 2017's Happy Death was a breath of fresh air for the horror genre. With Jessica Roth as Teresa Geldman, the picture centers on the absolute worst sort of Groundhog Day experience possible. A Groundhog Day where you're killed time and time again. Clever, humorous, and with a nice splash of gore, Happy Death Day found Roth's Tree having to avoid history repeating itself each and every time she awakens, with Tree using her smarts to avoid dying in the same way as the previous day. Of course, the catch here is that a new death ultimately awaits Tree each day. Not to pinpoint one particular idea per se, but the smartest decision that Tree makes in Happy Death Day was to constantly learn from her mistakes. I'm not talking about Sidney Prescott unloading an extra bullet into someone's skull here, but more how Tree approaches each day with a fresh perspective, as she looks to implement a new plan of attack based on how she was killed the day prior. Eventually, all of these different roads and rationales led Tree to the light bulb moment where she finally realizes that it's her roommate Laurie who's been behind all of this trauma. Number 2, making the most of technology. Halloween Resurrection. Halloween Resurrection regularly vies with Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers for the label of the worst offering to date in the Halloween franchise. Despite being a pretty damn awful movie, however, Resurrection does see some impressive smarts on the go from Bianca Kajlik's Sarah. Halloween Resurrection pulls inspiration from the ushering in of the Big Brother is watching you era, and also clinging on to the found footage subgenre that had boomed post the Blair Witch Project. As such, the film opts to have cameras installed in the famed Myers house, and has a bunch of naive young adults spend the night there for a reality webcast. What could possibly go wrong, eh? Of course, Michael soon shows up to slash and slay his way through this fame-hungry group, but feisty heroine Sarah has the genius idea of using the tech at her fingertips to navigate her way to safety. Using the hottest technology that 2002 could offer up, Sarah messages back and forth with her online crush Deckard. With Deckard watching in on the action, he's able to let Sarah know where the shape is, where to hide, and when to make her break for freedom. These days, so many people are glued to their phones in an infuriating manner, but to be fair, opting to do just that saved her bacon in Halloween Resurrection. Now we just need to somehow erase those memories of Busta Rhymes pulling out kung fu moves to defeat poor Michael as part of Resurrection's climax. Number 1. Helen embracing her fate in Candyman. It may sound defeatist, but sometimes the smartest thing to do in a slasher movie is to embrace your fate. While 1992's Candyman saw Virginia Madsen's Helen end up having a horrible death as she was burnt to a crisp, that decision proved to be a smart one where it pertains to the greater good. For Helen, that greater good was protecting the baby son of her friend Anne Marie. To do so, Helen ended up burning to death after finally giving in to the charming hook-handed Candyman. The Candyman implores Helen, who he believes to be the reincarnation of his former lover, to join him in his quest to strike fear into the residents of Cabrini Green, in order to maintain his legacy amongst modern-day folklore, and she finally bends to Candyman's will. It's only in doing this that Helen is able to save the life of young Anthony, even if her own fate may be not quite so much of a positive one. That said, Helen opting to give herself in to the Candyman did also have one added silver lining, as it let her become a vengeance-seeking spirit who was able to slice up her cheating ex-husband.
Slasher movies are a beloved subgenre of horror, with their unique blend of suspense, gore, and thrills. From the iconic villains to the creative kills, slasher films have captured the imaginations of audiences for decades. But what sets some of these movies apart are the smart decisions made by the protagonists, decisions that allow them to outwit the killers and survive until the end. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with 10 more smartest decisions in slasher horror movie history. Number 10. Michelle's vent escape plan in 10 Cloverfield Lane. Being trapped in a bunker with a crazy person is never a fun situation. In the movie 10 Cloverfield Lane, hero Michelle finds herself in this very predicament, with no way out in sight. However, she's not one to give up without a fight. Realizing that her captor, Howard Stambler, is a madman who will stop at nothing, Michelle begins to devise a plan to escape. After discovering a second exit hatch while fixing the ventilation system, she starts to put her plan into action. With Howard hot on her heels, Michelle manages to get the upper hand long enough to crawl through the vents and reach the hatch. But the question remains, how will she break through the lock? Using her quick thinking and resourcefulness, Michelle grabs a can of compressed air and freezes the lock, shattering it to pieces. So the next time you find yourself in a bunker with a crazy person, don't panic. Just remember Michelle's resourcefulness and keep a can of compressed air handy. You never know when it might come in handy. Number 9. Joel leaves town in Scream 2. Joel, the fresh-faced professional cameraman in Scream 2, makes a smart move by leaving town after sensing danger. He is clearly a better decision-maker than his predecessor from the original Scream movie, Kenny Jones. After he was assigned as Gale Weathers' new cameraman at Windsor College, Joel became increasingly weary of her need to follow the trail of the killer. He read her book and realized the danger he was in after learning about what happened to her original cameraman. It's a good thing Joel wasn't too proud to admit his mistake of not reading the book before taking the job. That decision probably saved his life. Joel's decision to leave town was a wise one. After Randy, one of his closest friends on campus, was killed, Joel knew he had to act fast. He returned briefly to film Gale's exclusive account, but wisely left after she and Dewey decided to leave the college. Joel's character may not have been the most prominent in Scream 2, but his decision to leave town was one of the smartest in slasher horror movie history. Number 8. Staying in crowded areas in Black Christmas. In the original Black Christmas movie, the killer's motive and identity are never fully revealed in the movie, but it is heavily implied that he suffered abuse in his past, which may have made him socially awkward and uncomfortable around other people. The college students that he targets don't know this about him, but they still make a conscious decision to stick together and stay in groups and crowds, which is a perfectly logical thing to do when faced with a deranged murderer. However, even though it makes perfect sense, we don't really see it often in slasher films. One of the most common tropes in these movies is people wandering off on their own and inevitably coming face to face with the killer. Black Christmas was one of the earliest slasher horrors, and it showed that having smart and realistic characters doesn't have to take away from the tension. Number 7. Sally injures Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. During the scene where Sally Hardesty is being held captive by Leatherface's family, she manages to break free for a moment and injure his leg with his own chainsaw. While Sally does not directly kill Leatherface, the injury she inflicts on him plays a significant role in allowing her to escape from the house and ultimately survive the ordeal. The scene is a powerful moment in the film, as Sally's courage and resourcefulness in the face of danger are on full display. It's a common slasher horror trope for the characters to try and confront the villain in order to kill him. This is a plan that more often than not fails and leads to the character's demise. Sally instead opted for hurting Leatherface just enough to buy herself some time and start making her escape. That is a refreshing turn of events and shows that there is more depth to Sally's character than you might have initially thought. Perhaps that's why she was the only one that survived and ultimately became one of the most iconic final girls of all time. Number 6. Max and friends set a trap in The Final Girls. We all have our favourite movies that we wish we could step into and experience for ourselves. However, there are some movies that are best left to the silver screen, particularly horror movies where survival is the name of the game. In The Final Girls, the main character Max and her friends find themselves trapped in a real-life horror flick with a masked terrorizer named Billy on the loose. As they struggle to survive, the group comes up with a plan to defeat their attacker by creating weapons, setting a trap, and luring him out. Their plan involves flaming arrows and a bucket of gasoline, making for an intense and high-stakes battle. While their plan ultimately leads to a kick-ass, self-referential slow-motion escape scene, it comes at a cost: the lives of some of their friends. This serves as a reminder that sometimes the best-laid plans can have unintended consequences. Number 5. Laurie turns a hanger into a blade in Halloween. In horror movies, survival often hinges on being resourceful and turning everyday objects into weapons. This is precisely what Laurie does when she finds herself being chased by Michael Myers in the original Halloween movie. As a babysitter, Laurie's responsibility is not only to protect herself, but also the children she's looking after. With quick thinking and determination, she creates a makeshift blade out of a coat hanger and uses it to stab Myers in the eye, temporarily disabling him and causing him to drop his knife. Laurie then picks up the knife and uses it to stab him in the chest. That proves a welcome distraction that the kids use to go to the neighbour's house and phone the police. Laurie's actions remind us that in the face of danger, quick thinking and resourcefulness can often make all the difference. Rather than being paralysed by fear, she uses her intelligence and creativity to outsmart her attacker and protect herself and those around her. Number 4. Ash replaces his arm with a chainsaw in Evil Dead 2. Losing a limb can be a traumatic experience, but it doesn't have to mean giving up hope. In the second installment in the Evil Dead franchise, the main character Ash Williams finds himself in a particularly difficult situation when he's forced to chop off his own arm. However, rather than letting this setback defeat him, Ash uses it to his advantage. He decides to attach a chainsaw to the stump of his missing hand. This unconventional weapon may seem crazy, but it proves to be effective in battling the Deadites. Talk about thinking outside the box. Overall, Ash's journey throughout the Evil Dead franchise is one of determination, courage, and a willingness to do whatever it takes to defeat the forces of evil. His chainsaw hand is just one example of his resourcefulness and ingenuity, and it has become one of the most iconic weapons in horror movie history. Number 3. Ginny puts on Mrs. Voorhees' jumper in Friday the 13th Part 2. In Friday the 13th Part 2, Ginny Field finds herself being chased around Camp Crystal Lake by none other than Jason Voorhees himself. But instead of just running for her life, she stumbles upon an altar dedicated to Jason's dead mother. Ginny uses her wits to outsmart the mask killer by putting on his mother's sweater and pretending to be her. The psychological trick works for a moment, and Jason lets his guard down, giving Ginny an opportunity to strike a killing blow. Unfortunately, things don't go as planned, and Jason catches on to Ginny's ruse. But as horror movie fans know, that doesn't necessarily mean the villain will come out on top. Despite Jason's realization, Ginny manages to subdue him shortly thereafter. In the end, Ginny's clever use of Jason's own issues against him shows that sometimes the key to beating a horror movie villain is not just brute force, but also psychological manipulation. And it certainly doesn't hurt to have a bit of luck on your side as well. Number 2. Dana presses the big red button in The Cabin in the Woods. The Cabin in the Woods is a horror movie that ticks all the boxes. You've got your creepy cabin in the woods, your unsuspecting group of friends, and your mysterious organisation controlling it all. When two members of the friend group, Dana and Marty, find themselves cornered by a group of heavily armed guards, it seems like there's no way out. That is, until they stumble upon a mysterious button labelled System Purge. In a split-second decision, they hit the button, not really knowing what to expect. What happens next is an absolute bloodbath. Every monster you could ever imagine is released from captivity, wreaking havoc on the unsuspecting guards and giving Dana and Marty a chance to make their escape. It's a brilliant move, but it also begs the question, why on earth does this button even exist? Who thought it was a good idea to have a System Purge button that could release all manner of terrifying creatures? Number 1. Karen fakes being too scared to shoot in Halloween. In Halloween, Karen Nelson comes up with an unusual idea that ends up being one of the most genius moves ever made in a slasher horror movie. While being chased by Michael Myers, she pretends to break down in fear and acts like she is unable to use her shotgun. By pretending to be too scared to shoot, Karen tricks Michael into revealing himself, which allows her to quickly shift her pose and shoot him in the cheek. This move not only catches Michael off guard, but also gives Karen's mother, Laurie, the opportunity to join in the fight and ultimately knock him down the stairs into the basement. Karen's fake-out also highlights the importance of strategy and intelligence in surviving a slasher film. Instead of relying solely on brute force or weapons, Karen uses her wits and psychological tactics to gain the upper hand in the fight against Michael. It not only showcases her badassery, but also reinforces the idea that survival in a slasher film requires both physical and mental strength. There are certain tropes which moviegoers expect to see while watching a horror. Buckets of blood, jump scares around every corner, a seemingly dead villain springing back to life. But there's another cliche that's all too common in the genre. Everyone acts like an idiot. Because these stereotypes are frustrating, it's nice to see someone in a found footage feature with some common sense. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture here with the 11 smartest decisions in found footage horror movies. Number 11. Sergio handcuffs Marie to the banister in Wreck. In Wreck, a reporter, Angela, and her cameraman Pablo are documenting night shift firefighters in Barcelona. After receiving a distress call from an apartment building, Angela and her party head there, where they encounter a savage woman. After she attacks the emergency workers, Angela learns the tenant has been infected with a rabies-like disease. Realizing others could be infected in classic zombie fashion, Officer Sergio safeguards Angela from potential harm. When a little girl called Jennifer becomes infected, she vomits blood on her mother, Marie, before running up the stairs. Knowing Jennifer can infect others, it's Sergio's top priority to chase after her. But before he does, he handcuffs Marie to the staircase since Jennifer has exposed her to the same virus. Because Jennifer's transformation occurs in the blink of an eye, Sergio may not have noticed the threat Marie posed. Luckily, the officer recognized the danger and had her incapacitated immediately. Not only was this a smart move, but it totally pays off in a more twisted and unintended way. When a bunch of zombified citizens burst into the building later, they try to attack Sergio and Angela. Because Marie is cuffed, the Horde see her as an easy target and go for her instead, giving the others enough time to flee upstairs. Number 10. Martine recognizes the threat immediately in Paranormal Activity 2. Paranormal Activity 2 opens with Daniel Ray's home being trashed by an unseen demon. Unsurprisingly, Daniel's daughters, Christy and Katie, are left terrified. Daniel dismisses their concerns, believing there's a rational explanation why the doors close by themselves and why everything in the kitchen levitates. It's probably just the wind. Fortunately, Martine, the housekeeper, immediately recognizes the danger the Rays are in. Hoping to expel the evil spirit, Martine burns sage throughout the house. Because Daniel has no belief in the supernatural, he berates Martine for her actions before firing her. When Daniel later realizes the demon is real, he rehires Martine, hoping she can protect them. Sadly, it's too little too late. After the malevolent force possesses Katie, it uses her body to kill Daniel and Christy. She then takes her infant half-brother, Ali, before disappearing into the night. The only person in the Ray house who didn't suffer a horrific fate was Martine, the one person who did everything in her power to warn the family. If Daniel listened to Martine from the beginning, all of them would have been spared. Number 9. The charcoal trick in The Taking of Deborah Logan. This supernatural flick begins with filmmaker Mia prepping a documentary about Deborah, a relative of hers suffering from Alzheimer's. So, when our titular character acts aggressively, Mia initially assumes it's due to her debilitating disease. But after Deborah starts moving and speaking in an inhuman manner, the film crew suspects she's possessed. At one point, they notice Deborah repeatedly plugs into line 337 on the switchboard in the home. Checking the records, it appears the crew are at a dead end when realizing the line 337 page has been torn out of the logbook. Or so it seems. One of Mia's crew, Luis, smudges charcoal on the previous page, allowing the team to make out the lettering on the torn out sheet. After reading it, the group track line 337 to a deceased man called Henri Desjardins, and after a bit of detective work, they discover Henri is the one who possessed Deborah. If Luis didn't pull off this little trick, Mia's investigation would have come to an abrupt stop, but thanks to this Scooby-Doo shit, as Luis gracefully puts it, they cracked the case. Number 8. A zombie takes his own life in VHS 2. Like its predecessor, VHS 2 is a horror anthology consisting of several found footage shorts. The second chapter centers around a biker called Mike who's bitten by a passing zombie. Upon reanimation, Mike goes on a rampage, leading him to a birthday party. As can be expected from a zombie story, most of the characters in the scene showcase no preservation skills, even while being hounded by a deranged flesh eater. Ironically, the only person who's using his brain is Mike. Despite being an undead monster, Mike repeatedly demonstrates his old identity is still there, buried deep inside. When he sees his reflection, he has a moment of recognition. After discovering a teddy bear, he momentarily ceases his killing spree. And when he butt dials his girlfriend and hears her voice, it awakens enough of Mike's personality to let him retake control of his body. Knowing it's only a matter of time before his lust for human flesh overpowers him, Mike picks up a shotgun and blows his head off. He may have been mentally impaired, but this was one zombie with enough brains to make the right choice. Number 7. The witch urges her victims to look at her in Blair Witch. Blair Witch kicks off with James Donahue heading into the Burkittsville woods. While there, he hopes to find answers about his sister Heather, who went missing years ago while recording a project about the Blair Witch. In the climax, James and his friends are lured to Rustin Parr's home, the same place where Heather met her demise. Over time, the witch kills all of James's friends, save for himself and Lisa. Rather than fighting her head-on, James orders Lisa to face the wall, knowing the witch only slaughters her prey while looking at them. In theory, it's a smart idea. Unfortunately, the witch's plan is smarter. Recognizing James's clever scheme, the witch tricks him by mimicking his sister's voice. James instinctively turns around, allowing the sorceress to kill him. Lisa proves to be a bit smarter, using the camcorder to peer behind her without risking eye contact with her pursuer. But when the witch imitates James's voice, Lisa can't help looking, allowing the demonic woman to deliver the killing blow. Up until this point, it's easy to believe the Blair Witch is a brutish monster, devoid of intellect. However, this sneaky tactic proved she was more cunning than her victims ever imagined. Number 6. Aaron drugs Joseph in Creep. In Creep, a videographer named Aaron is hired to record a stranger named Joseph who claims to be terminally ill. Throughout the day, Aaron notices odd behavior from Joseph, including jokes he makes about killing him. Yeah, I'd say that's a big red flag. When Joseph claims he raped his wife, Aaron realizes he needs to leave the cabin ASAP. Although Joseph encourages him to stay, Aaron is dead set on leaving. Refusing to take no for an answer, Joseph says Aaron can go after they share a drink. When Aaron can't find his car keys, Joseph encourages him to spend the night. Not taking any chances, Aaron spikes Joseph's drink, knocking him out. Although he eventually comes to, Joseph is too lethargic to overpower Aaron, allowing him to escape. Even though Joseph is obviously dangerous from the get-go, it's easy to see how he coaxed Aaron into this situation. By playing the victim and using subtle psychological tactics, Joseph is able to lure Aaron into a false sense of security. Fortunately, Aaron sees right through Joseph's ploy, allowing him to get the upper hand of his tormentor, though sadly not for long enough. Number 5. Insurance policy in unfriended dark web. In Unfriended Dark Web, Matthias steals a laptop from a cyber cafe and claims it as his own. Matthias notices the Facebook is still connected to the account of the previous owner, Charon 4. After receiving disturbing messages from Charon's employers, Matthias checks the hard drive's content where he discovers the owner is a, get this, dark web assassin. Worse still, the killer can see everything Matthias does through his camera and threatens to murder his friends and girlfriend if he doesn't return the laptop. Because Charon has been compromised, Matthias is certain the hitman will slaughter everyone no matter what. That's when Matthias turns the tables. Since he's connected to Charon's account, Matthias is able to transfer $10,000 from his account into his own. If Charon doesn't keep his word, he'll lose the money. And because this exchange is against protocol in Charon's line of work, his employers immediately know something is wrong. Recognizing his career and life has been jeopardized, Charon is left with no choice but to accept Matthias's terms. It's fantastic to watch this scenario play out since Charon, who appeared to be holding all the cards, finds himself at Matthias's mercy within seconds. Number 4. Abelard throws the exorcist off the scent in The Last Exorcism. The Last Exorcism follows an atheist priest, Marcus, who performs fraudulent exorcisms on people who claim to be possessed. By order of Pastor Manley, Marcus is asked to exorcise a girl called Nell. When she shows signs of pregnancy, Nell insists she was impregnated by a demon since she's a virgin. Although Marcus dismisses her claims at first, he doubts himself after seeing Nell perform supernatural acts. But when Nell's demon, Abelard, speaks to Marcus, he notices something unusual about his phrasing. After Abelard asks if Marcus wants a blowing job, the priest points out a depraved demon would know the correct name for every sexual act, proving Nell isn't possessed and is just an innocent young girl. Ashamed, Nell confesses she got pregnant by having normal human sex with a man called Logan. Marcus then tracks down Logan to validate Nell's story. Upon speaking to Logan, Marcus learns the pair never slept together. Through further deduction, Marcus discovers Abelard is real and deliberately misspoke to delegitimize Nell's claims. By the time Marcus realizes his blunder, it's too late. As he returns to Nell's home, she gives birth to Abelard's offspring before he can reach her. Well played, Abelard. Well played. Number 3. The psychic leaves in Paranormal Activity. While watching haunted house movies, it's hard not to ask the age-old question that's baffled filmgoers for years. Why don't they just leave? If a building contains a poltergeist that tosses furniture around and sucks children into televisions, there's no logical explanation why the homeowners would remain there. This plot hole is often addressed while discussing Paranormal Activity, since Mika and Katie stay in their haunted home long after the entity attacks them. To be fair, it's established the spirit will follow the couple if they leave, since it's tethered to them, but it doesn't change the fact that Mika takes no precautions against the vengeful being and constantly antagonizes it. Which is why it's reassuring to see psychic Dr. Fredericks react to the ghost in a sensible manner. When he arrives in the house, he gives Mika and Katie some advice to help them. When he returns days later, Fredericks recognizes the paranormal power certainly doesn't like that I'm here. Realizing his presence is aggravating the ghost, Fredericks skedaddles. Running away may seem cowardly, but Fredericks' actions kept him alive. If Katie and Mika packed up and left immediately after they noticed spooky phenomena in their home, they wouldn't have suffered their grisly fate either. Number 2. Using himself as a sacrifice in Deadstream. Deadstream revolves around a YouTuber, Sean, trying to get his career back on track. Thinking he has a hit on his hands, he heads inside a haunted house and streams his experience there for the night. After being attacked by the demonic ghost of Mildred Pratt and her ghouls though, he realises he's bitten off more than he can chew. Despite being depicted as a naive, if hilarious buffoon, Sean is surprisingly resourceful. Rather than investigating every creepy noise, he looks at the camera footage of each room through his iPad. Every time he's attacked, he neutralises the threat efficiently and succinctly. When he doesn't know what to do, he asks viewers for help. Acknowledging Mildred cannot be beaten in a straight fight, Sean realises he must banish her to hell with an incantation. After performing the ritual, he's surprised to see it doesn't work. Remembering the spell requires a sacrifice of flesh, he lops off his own finger and tries again. This time the incantation is successful, casting Mildred to hell. Despite Sean's victory, things are far from over. As he attempts to leave, Sean sees Mildred's ghouls following him, implying he's replaced her as the ruler of the house. This is a bittersweet ending, since Sean was 10 times more adaptable than most horror heroes, and yet he still got screwed. Number 1. David cracked the entire case single-handedly in Searching. In Searching, a teen called Margot goes missing, compelling her father David to look for clues on her computer. After Detective Vic takes on the case, she informs David that Margot probably ran away. After further investigation, David learns his daughter befriended a teen online calling herself Fish and Chips. Vix confirms Fish and Chips has an alibi and so dismisses her as a suspect. When David finds Margot's keychain at Barbosa Lake, Vix starts a manhunt for her, with the lake serving as ground zero. Later, Vix informs David an ex-con called Randy confessed to murdering Margot before killing himself. Ready to say goodbye to his daughter, David uploads photos of her to a funeral site. But after noticing the site has the same stock photo as Fish and Chips, David realizes Vix lied about the teen having an alibi. After piecing everything together, David discovers Vic's son, Robert, better known as Fish and Chips, left Margot for dead after they got into a fight. To protect Robert, Vix took the case, hoping to steer David from the truth. Thanks to David's actions, Vix and her son are arrested for their crimes. But David's not finished. Because Vix oversaw the manhunt, David rationalizes Margot could be in the area in Barbosa Lake that Vix claimed had already been searched, to cover her tracks. Sure enough, Margot is found in the searched region. Although she's badly injured, Margot makes a full recovery. Simply put, David is a frickin' genius. Even though some of his theories didn't pan out, he never gave up. No matter how many times he was misled, he found answers by listening to his gut and his heart. Rather than letting the experts take control, he and he alone solved everything by himself. How many times have you been left screaming at your TV or a cinema screen at the utterly baffling decisions made by certain horror characters? Likely too many to count, we're sure. It may not be as prevalent these days, largely thanks to something like Scream poking fun at such idiocy, but for the longest time, horror movies were overflowing with total fools. Thankfully, not everyone in one of these pictures is a total tool, and it's on those smarter folks that the spotlight shines today. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie with What Culture, here with the 10 smartest decisions in recent horror movies. Number 10. The faked suicide in Halloween Ends. Halloween Ends was nothing if not opinion-splitting when it sliced its way to the silver screen last year. But one of the things most viewers could agree on was that Laurie Strode was positioned as extremely smart. Granted, the biggest gripe about Halloween Ends is that it features such minimal Laurie versus Michael Myers action, with Rowan Campbell's Corey Cunningham taking centre stage on the villain front, but the way in which Strode tricks Corey was fantastically done. To be fair, this whole situation tricked a fair few moviegoers upon a first watch, with Jamie Lee Curtis's iconic character seemingly at such a low point that she was about to take her own life. And Laurie even called 911 to report her impending suicide before putting a gun to her head. So, when we hear a gunshot and see a splatter of something, it's easy to see why the lurking Corey would presume Laurie had shot herself. Only she hadn't, and instead it was Cunningham who was soon shot by the wily veteran. Number 9. Using the orange Totsia in Prey. After several bland to bad offerings in the franchise, 2022's Prey was a great return to form for an IP which first impressed audiences back in 1987 with the Arnold Schwarzenegger-fronted Predator. Far from the big beefy boys with big beefy guns approach of that original movie though, Prey is an incredibly stripped back affair that drops the titular Yatua species into 1700's Great Northern Plains. With Comanche warrior Naru at the core of this tale, she is one of several who have run-ins with the film's sole alien hunter. Unlike the vast majority of the other characters in Prey Mind, Naru not only survives this encounter, but she actually manages to kill and behead the beast. To do that, she realises that the Yatua relies on body heat to detect movement and kill its target. This is where the orange totsia, an orange flower, comes in handy, as ingesting this plant or rubbing it on your body naturally lowers a person's temperature. Upon utilising this herb, Naru effectively levels the playing field for Prey's final battle, and if anything, her knowledge of her surroundings gives her an advantage over her opponent. As such, this badass is able to get the better of the intergalactic brute and eventually fatally turn its own weapon against the creature. Number 8. Making the most of your tools in The Reef Stalked. To some, The Reef is the very best shark movie not named Jaws. So, when a sequel, The Reef Stalked, swam its way to screens last summer, there was some hope that this second Reef picture would capture some of the nerve-shredding dread and tension of its predecessor. Unfortunately, Stalked proved to be somewhat of a disappointment in that regard. Completely unrelated to The Reef, this sequel centres on sisters Nick and Annie, and their friends Jodie and Lisa, as they find themselves out in the water and, stalked by a great white shark. You see, this group had met up to mark the death of Nick and Annie's sibling Kath, who was killed by her abusive husband 9 months ago. By the Reef Stalked's finale, Lisa has fallen victim to this shark, and our remaining trio are stranded in a small knackered boat that's taking on water. It's here that Nick comes up with an extremely simple but extremely effective plan. Realising that the only items on the boat with them are a mesh net and a machete, Nick lures in the apex predator, throws the net over it, and then eventually stabs the beast to death. Number 7. Grabbing the hand sanitizer in Scream. Keeping your hands clean is always a good habit to keep on top of, and having some hand sanitizer to hand in 2022's Scream proved to be the perfect way to take down one of that picture's deranged ghost faces. While Richie is off battling his supposed girlfriend Tara, Sid and Gail are tasked with fighting Mikey in the kitchen of the house previously owned by Stu Marker's family. With Mikey having the upper hand as she takes on these two wounded veterans of this beloved series, Prescott grabs a nearby glass jar of hand sanitizer and smashes it over the lunatic's head. After the stovetop is then conveniently turned on, Gail shoots Mikey in the face, which causes her to stumble towards the stove's flame. Due to the alcohol prevalent in the hand sanitizer, this immediately causes Mikey to be set on fire in an extremely gnarly way. Number 6. Going along with your attackers in the Utah Cabin Murders. The Utah Cabin Murders is not a good movie. That said, it does feature a life-saving decision towards the close. Based on a very real 1990 home invasion by Von Taylor and Edward Deli, this picture sees these two convicts torment a family at their remote cabin retreat. While the names of the killers are the same as the real-life counterparts, the family name has been changed to Anderson for the film. The Utah Cabin Murders sees the grandmother and mother of the Anderson family executed by these nefarious masked figures. For the father, Richard, he's shot and presumed dead, which leads to Taylor and Deli turning their attention to sisters Linnea and Tina. Unfortunately, this attention means that Taylor in particular wants to take the girls upstairs to have sex with them. Shockingly, the older of the sisters agrees to this, and the siblings and their attackers head up to one of the bedrooms. Where this ultimately proves to be a wise move is that Linnea had noticed that her dad wasn't quite as dead as was believed. Getting these creeps out of that room allowed for the family patriarch to call the police, who arrived in time to arrest the two men. In the real world, Von Taylor was handed the death penalty, which has continuously been challenged to this day for his actions, whereas Edward Deli received a life sentence. Number 5. Refusing the Cenobites' gift in Hellraiser. Throughout the vast Hellraiser franchise, there are so many characters who have fallen afoul of the series' Cenobites and been swayed by their charms and promises. One such person who you cannot say that about, though, is Riley McKendry of the most recent Hellraiser outing. A recovering drug addict, Riley's life is thrown upside down when she stumbles across the Lament configuration puzzle box. After initially solving this puzzle, chaos, carnage, and twisted imagery ensues for the character. And on that front, the biggest shock to Riley is the death of her brother Matt as part of the Cenobites' lust for pain, pleasure, and general sacrifice. By Hellraiser's closing moments, Riley has played a part in helping the Cenobites fill their required sacrifices, and thus she is offered a gift by their sinister swords. That gift? Why, it's for Matt to be resurrected. Despite the obvious emotional pull that's there to bring her brother back to life, Riley ultimately decides against doing so. While she now has to deal with the grief and loss of her sibling, this character is one who is wise enough to realise that accepting a gift from the Cenobites will eventually come back to bite her on the backside down the line. Number 4. Stanley's sacrifice in It Chapter 2. While his Losers Club friends would have clearly loved to have Stanley with them for their later life battle with Pennywise in It Chapter 2, the narrative of this Stephen King adaptation is that the losers were only able to truly stop the dancing clown once and for all because of Stanley's passing. It's extremely hard to justify someone taking their own life as being a smart decision. But the closing moments of Chapter 2 frame it as though the losers wouldn't have had the full motivation to topple Pennywise were it not for Stan's death being a tool to fully bring them together for this battle. Once Bill Skarsgård's heinous Harlequin had been dispatched of at the end of this second picture, there's a slight jump forward in time where we see Mike receive a letter from the deceased Stanley. A letter which details how Stanley was too scared to fight it and that him sacrificing his life was essentially for the greater good. Stanley's intentions certainly worked, but it obviously remains to be seen whether Stan really needed to be so extreme in his actions in order to motivate his old school pals. Number 3. The fireworks in A Quiet Place. 2018's A Quiet Place is a tense picture, and few scenes are quite as tense as the moment when Emily Blunt's Evelyn Abbott goes into labour. Seeing how giving birth is one of the most painful things a human body can go through, combined with the fact that A Quiet Place features a world in which murderous blind aliens kill anyone who makes even the tiniest of sounds, you can understand why the Abbotts have quite the pickle here. Should Evelyn make a sound during childbirth, that will result in the death of herself and her impending new arrival. In a rather genius piece of thinking, the Abbott family had planned ahead here, with them having some fireworks hidden at a decent enough distance from their farmhouse. The clan's eldest son, Marcus, swiftly sprints out to the spot of these fireworks and sets them off as the labour begins, causing the alien creatures to be distracted by this spectacle, and also allowing Evelyn to let out some screams of pain as she gives birth in the bathtub to the family's latest addition. Number 2. Agreeing to try again in The Invisible Man. Writer-director Leigh Whannelly dived into reimagining H.G. Wells' 1987 tale for a new Invisible Man movie, which explored domestic abuse, gaslighting, and provided numerous terrifying sequences. Here, a phenomenal Elizabeth Moss plays Cecilia Cass, a woman stuck in an abusive relationship with wealthy engineering genius Adrian Griffin. After Adrian commits suicide and leaves C $5 million, she starts to experience strange occurrences from an unseen presence that is the totally not dead Adrian in an invisible suit. Skipping ahead past Adrian framing Cecilia for several murders, her being committed to a psychiatric ward, and then Adrian being found held captive after his brother Tom was shot dead for being the Invisible Man, C put a masterful plan in place. Pregnant with Adrian's child, Cecilia is well aware that Tom was likewise set up by his own sibling, and so she agrees to give her relationship with Adrian one more try, solely so that she can wear a police wire and get a confession out of him. When Moss's character heads to the bathroom, Adrian slits his own throat, which is recorded on the house's CCTV, not to mention the police wire picks up Cecilia's screams and subsequent 911 call once she returns to the room. In actuality, C has donned an invisible suit as part of her bathroom break, and she then forced her tormentor to draw a steak knife across his throat. Number 1. Drinking the milk in Barbarian. When people talk about how horror is absolutely thriving right now, last year's Barbarian is a prime example of why it's such a great time to be a horror hound these days. While it's one thing to deliver a spine-chilling trailer, it's something else entirely to follow through on that promise and deliver a spine-chilling final product. Thankfully, Barbarian did just that. Plot-wise, this Zach Cregger-helmed offering initially centres on Tess and Keith, two strangers who have been double-booked in the same Airbnb house. Given how Tess is the audience's in for the picture, there's a suspicion that maybe Keith isn't quite as pleasant as we're led to believe. Even more so when Tess discovers a hidden room with a blood-stained mattress and a camcorder in it. The tease is that Keith is responsible for what's in this hidden room, and subsequently he's well aware of the underground tunnels that this leads to. Of course he's not, and the poor fella is brutally beaten to death by the deformed figure of Mother. By the time Tess and the house's owner AJ wind up in the clutches of Mother later in the film, Tess has to disgustingly drink Mother's milk. By doing this, she unknowingly formed a bond with the creature, a bond that saw Mother save Tess in Barbarian's climax after AJ had pushed Tess to her likely death in order to save his own skin.